When a Sigma male breaks, the world won't see it. There's no explosion, no meltdown, no dramatic collapse. His breaking happens in silence, deep inside, where no one notices the moment his heart fractures or his trust collapses. But what makes him different is this: his breaking is not destruction, it's transformation. While others fall apart loudly, the Sigma shatters inwardly, rebuilds quietly, and rises in a way no one expects. His breaking is the moment he stops pretending, stops tolerating, stops carrying what was never his responsibility. It's the death of who he used to be, and the beginning of who he is meant to become. Most people break in ways that keep them stuck, lost, or dependent. But when a Sigma breaks, he doesn't crumble. He recalibrates. He becomes colder to what once hurt him, clearer about who deserves him, sharper in instinct, and unshakable in boundaries. The pain doesn't weaken him, it purifies him. It removes illusions, exposes truths, and forces him to rise into a version of himself that feels almost untouchable. He doesn't return to who he was before, because breaking taught him the truth about people, about loyalty, about himself. And once a Sigma male breaks, he becomes someone no one can break the same way again. Before you go, tell me this: what moment in your life changed you so deeply you never returned to who you were? Your answer helps me see the real ultra-wise community. If you watch to the end, comment "unbroken" so I know you're one of the loyal viewers who stays until the last second. And remember, 85% of viewers still aren't subscribed. Hit subscribe so we can keep this channel growing stronger every day. Ultra-wise rises because of you. When he breaks, he withdraws into silence, not to escape, but to rebuild without interruption. When a Sigma male reaches his breaking point, he doesn't explode outward like others do. There are no dramatic outbursts, no cries for attention, no visible sign that something inside him has shattered. Instead, he retreats into a silence so deep it unsettles anyone who truly knows him. But that silence isn't retreat, it's reconstruction. It's the sacred space where he gathers the fragments of himself without the noise of the world telling him how he should feel or who he should be. He withdraws because healing requires privacy, because transformation demands that no one interrupts the process. And in that quiet isolation, the version of him that was breaking begins to die, making room for the one that will rise. To the outside world, his withdrawal looks like distance, coldness, indifference. People think he's shutting them out, but the truth is, he's shutting out everything that once blinded him, drained him, or diluted his sense of self. Silence becomes the environment where he faces the emotional damage he never spoke about. Solitude becomes the forge where he studies his wounds without fear of judgment or misunderstanding. He revisits every betrayal, every disappointment, every moment. He bent himself to accommodate others, not to reopen the pain, but to understand it and extract the lesson hidden inside it. In his silence, he is not collapsing, he is reorganizing his soul. During this rebuilding phase, he becomes hyper-awareness of what he can no longer accept. The people who once had easy access to his heart now feel distant. The habits that once distracted him no longer hold power, and the emotional patterns that kept him stuck become impossible to tolerate. His silence removes illusions. It strips away all the noise that once kept him blind to the truth. This clarity is painful at first, but with every day he spends alone, he becomes sharper, lighter, stronger. He starts releasing emotional weight he didn't even realize he was carrying. He begins choosing himself in ways he never dared to before. By the time he steps out of this silence, he is unrecognizable, not to others, but to his old self. The man who entered the silence was wounded, exhausted, and overwhelmed. The man who emerges is steady, guarded, and unshakably aware of his worth. His withdrawal was never about escaping the world. It was about rebuilding the world within him. And once he rises from that quiet reconstruction, nothing and no one can break him the same way again. His breaking hardens his boundaries, making him immune to what once wounded him. When a Sigma male breaks, something fundamental shifts inside him. The soft spots that once made him vulnerable begin to harden with purpose. He remembers every moment he said yes when he wanted to say no. Every time he tolerated disrespect. Every time he allowed others access to places they didn't deserve to enter. Breaking forces him to confront the truth. The pain didn't come from caring too much, but from not protecting himself enough. So his boundaries begin to rise, not as walls built out of fear, but as shields forged from clarity. The emotional openings where people once slipped through unnoticed are now sealed with intention, precision, and self-respect. What once wounded him now teaches him where never to bleed again. These new boundaries aren't loud or aggressive. They're silent but unmistakable. He no longer entertains half-hearted apologies, inconsistent behavior, or people who drain more than they give. He recognizes manipulation the moment it appears. He senses selfishness before it fully reveals itself. The emotional patterns that once left him confused now stand out like bright warning signs he can't ignore. And because he knows himself better after breaking, he no longer feels guilty for walking away. Distance becomes his protection, solitude becomes his filter, and silence becomes his no when words are unnecessary. The same situations that once broke him now fail to even penetrate his awareness, not because he's cold, but because he finally understands the value of his own peace. This boundary shift changes every relationship in his life. People who once relied on his softness begin to feel the firmness of his new limits. Those who once took advantage of his empathy realize they can't access him the way they used to. Even those who genuinely care must meet him with consistency, honesty, and depth, because he no longer tolerates anything less. His breaking didn't make him unkind, it made him clear. It taught him that protecting himself is not selfish, it is survival, it is self-respect, it is strength earned through suffering. By the time he fully embodies this new version of himself, he's no longer afraid of being hurt, because he understands that pain only reaches those who leave themselves open to what harms them. Now, he protects his time, his emotions, his energy with a precision he never had before, and because his boundaries are shaped by experience, not ego, they turn him into a man who cannot be manipulated, drained, or broken the same way again. His breaking didn't make him fragile, it made him immune. Pain turns into clarity for him, revealing who truly belongs in his life and who never did. When a Sigma male breaks, the pain doesn't just wound him, it awakens him. It sharpens his vision in a way comfort never could. Suddenly, the people he once defended, excused, or held onto begin to look different. Their intentions become clearer, their patterns more visible, their true value unmistakable. The emotional fog that once blurred his judgment evaporates, and he finally sees who genuinely cared and who only stayed for what he provided. Pain becomes the light that exposes every false bond, every imbalanced relationship, every person who should have never been granted access to his inner world. In the middle of heartbreak, his intuition becomes louder than ever, whispering the truths he ignored for too long. As this clarity unfolds, he begins to understand why certain relationships drained him, why some connections felt forced, why others collapsed the moment he stopped giving. He sees the friends who only appeared when life was easy, the people who offered affection only when they needed something, the ones who praised him publicly but doubted him privately. Pain removes the filter that once made their behavior seem acceptable. Now, every action reveals intention. Every silence reveals loyalty, and every inconsistency reveals incompatibility. He no longer looks at people through hope. He looks at them through honesty. And honesty shows him who was genuinely there and who was merely visiting. This clarity becomes the force that reshapes his entire life. He begins to detach without anger, distance himself without explanation, and walk away without guilt. He understands that loyalty without reciprocity is self-betrayal, and love without respect is slow destruction. Pain taught him that not everyone deserves a seat at his table, not every voice deserves influence over his choices, and not every presence deserves a place in his future. His circle becomes smaller, not because he's shutting people out, but because he finally understands who belongs and who never did. And in that refinement, he discovers the rare few who truly see him, value him, and walk with him, not above him or behind him. By the time the Sigma male heals, he is no longer surrounded by noise. His life becomes quieter but richer, simpler but deeper. He no longer wastes energy on people who only bring confusion, drama, or emotional imbalance. Pain gave him clarity, clarity that becomes a permanent compass. And once he sees the truth, he never unsees it. The people who truly belong in his life remain effortlessly, and the rest fade out of his world without him needing to push. His clarity becomes peace, and his peace becomes power. Instead of collapsing, he evolves, shedding old versions of himself like dead weight. When a Sigma male reaches the point where most people would fall apart, something entirely different happens inside him. He doesn't collapse under the weight of pain. He transforms beneath it. Breaking forces him to confront the version of himself he can no longer carry, the version that tolerated too much, trusted too easily, overgave without receiving, or stayed silent to keep the peace. Pain becomes the trigger that tells him he has outgrown the identity he once lived in, and instead of clinging to who he was, he begins to strip away the layers that no longer serve him. He sheds old habits, old attachments, old illusions, all the emotional weight that held him back. What others call breaking is actually the moment he begins to evolve. At first, this evolution feels like a quiet collapse, but it isn't. It's dismantling. He takes apart every belief that kept him small. He re-examines every boundary he failed to draw. He confronts every wound he left unhealed. It's painful, yes, but it's also intentional. The Sigma male understands that he cannot step into his next chapter while dragging the outdated versions of himself along. So he lets them die. The people pleaser dies. The overly loyal version dies. The emotionally accessible version dies. The forgiving to a fault version dies. And with each death, he makes space for a stronger, clearer, more defined identity to emerge. He doesn't collapse under pain. He uses pain as the blueprint for reinvention. During this evolution, his behavior changes in ways that startle those around him. He no longer accepts situations that drain him. He no longer explains himself to those committed to misunderstanding him. He no longer seeks validation from people who never valued him. His silence becomes deeper, his presence becomes heavier, and his standards become colder. The world thinks he's becoming colder, but in truth, he's becoming cleaner in thought, in attachment, in priorities. He is refining himself into a version that aligns with his inner truth, not external expectations. His evolution is not about becoming harder. It's about becoming wiser. By the time he emerges from this silent evolution, he is almost unrecognizable to those who knew the older versions of him. He walks with a steadier energy, a sharpened intuition, and a level of self-respect that cannot be challenged. He no longer bends. He no longer breaks the same way. Instead of collapsing under pressure, he rises through it, transformed, disciplined, and reborn. What once felt like the end becomes the beginning, of the strongest chapter of his life. The Sigma male doesn't break and stay broken. He breaks and becomes someone pain cannot touch again. Once he breaks and rises again, no one can break him the same way a second time. A Sigma male may break once, but he never breaks the same way twice. When life shatters him, when betrayal cuts deep, when disappointment hits harder than expected, he goes through a transformation that few people truly understand. He studies the pain, he analyzes the pattern, he examines every moment that led to his downfall, not to replay the hurt, but to ensure he never walks blindly into the same trap again. His breaking becomes education, his wounds become maps, his scars become warnings, and by the time he rises again, he is not the same man who once fell. The version of him that could be broken so easily no longer exists. He becomes fortified, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. What once destroyed him now becomes the armor that protects him. In his rebirth, he develops a new level of awareness that makes him nearly impossible to deceive. He sees danger earlier. He senses dishonesty faster. He recognizes emotional manipulation before the first sentence is even finished. The red flags he once ignored now stand out like flames in the dark. He trusts selectively, loves intelligently, and gives himself only where he feels genuine safety. His boundaries sharpen, his instincts deepen, and his tolerance for disrespect drops to zero. People who once could influence his emotions now find themselves powerless. Life taught him through pain, and he learned so completely that the same lesson will never be repeated. This new resilience confuses those who once had access to him. They try the same tactics, guilt, charm, pressure, emotional push-pull, but none of it works anymore. His mind is too clear, his heart too guarded, his spirit too steady to be shaken by the familiar tricks of the past. He doesn't argue, he doesn't explain, he doesn't beg. He simply walks away, silently, permanently, with a calmness that only someone who has already rebuilt himself can possess. People who once thought they could break him again learn something shocking. He is no longer the man they once knew. Pain matured him into someone unbreakable. By the time he rises into this final form, he becomes untouchable in ways the world cannot predict. Not cold, controlled, not distant, disciplined, not heartless, self-protecting. He refuses to repeat cycles that once destroyed him, refuses to reopen doors that once cost him peace, refuses to allow anyone to pull him back into a previous version of himself. He rises once and stays risen, and from that moment on, no betrayal, no disappointment, no loss can break him the same way again. His strength becomes permanent, his evolution irreversible, his resilience legendary. In the end, a Sigma male doesn't break the way others do, because breaking is not his ending, it's his turning point. Every fracture becomes a lesson, every wound becomes a warning, every collapse becomes the foundation for a stronger, sharper version of himself. He rises from the pain with new eyes, new instincts, and a new understanding of who deserves to stay in his life and who never should have been there. And once he rises for good. He becomes a man shaped by storms, not defeated by them. Before you go, tell me this. What did life teach you after your hardest break? Your answer helps me see the real ultra-wise minds walking this journey. If you watched until the end, comment unbreakable so I know you're one of the true supporters who stays with me through every second. And don't forget, 85% of viewers are still not subscribed. Hit subscribe so we can keep growing this powerful, ultra-wise community together.